Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to share in this great body of wisdom that's both written in a text before us and is inscribed in the faces and souls of those who are before us. We are in Parshat Behar-Bechukotai, the concluding portions in the book of Leviticus, begins with chapter 5, verse 1. And we will read through our English translation. I'll share with you a focused study, and then we will open it up for our collaborative conversation. At this point, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for this moment together. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvot tzivanu b'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. So we're in the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verse 1. Let me share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Adonai spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of Adonai. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of Adonai. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during its Sabbath will produce, you, or your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you. Your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield. June, would you like to continue there at verse 8?
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years. Then you shall sound the horn loud in the 7th month on the 10th day of the month, the day of atonement. You shall have the horn sounded throughout your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to his holding, and each of you shall return to his family. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. You shall not sow, neither shall you reap the aftergrowth or harvest the untrimmed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You may only eat the growth direct from the field.
Thank you, June. Richard, would you like to continue there at verse 13?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his holding. When you sell property to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. In buying from your neighbor, you shall deduct only for the number of years since the Jubilee, and in selling to you, he shall charge you only for the remaining crop years. The more such years, the higher the price you pay. The fewer such years, the lower the price, for what he is selling you is in number of harvests. Do not wrong one another, but fear your Lord, for I, the Lord, am your God.
Thank you, Richard. Robin, would you like to continue there at verse 18?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. You shall observe my laws and faithfully keep my rules, that you may live upon the land in security. The land shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill, and you shall live upon it in security. And should you ask, what are we to eat in the 7th year if we may neither sow nor gather in our crops? I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will still be eating old grain of that crop. You will be eating the old until the 9th year, until its crops come in. But the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me. Throughout the land that you hold, you must provide for the redemption of the land.
Thank you, Robin. Margot, would you like to continue at verse 25?
Thank you. If your kinsman is in straits and has to sell part of his holding, his nearest redeemer shall come and redeem what his kinsman has sold. If a man has no one to redeem for him, but prospers and acquires enough to redeem with, he shall compute the years since the sale and return to his holdings. If he lacks sufficient means to recover it, what he sold shall remain with the purchaser until the Jubilee. In the Jubilee year, it shall be released, and he shall return to his holding.
Thank you, Margot. And Dave, would you like to continue there, verse 29?
If any party sells a dwelling house in a walled city, it may be redeemed until a year has elapsed since its sale. The redemption period shall be a year. If it is not redeemed before a full year has elapsed, the house in the walled city shall pass to the purchaser beyond reclaim throughout the ages. It shall not be released in the Jubilee. But the houses in villages that have no encircling walls shall be classed as open country. They may be redeemed, and they shall be released through the Jubilee. As for the cities of Levi, the houses in the cities it holds, Levi shall forever have the right of redemption. Such property may be redeemed from Levi. Houses sold in a city it holds shall be released through the Jubilee, for the houses in the cities of Levi are its holdings among the Israelites. But the unenclosed land about its cities cannot be sold, for that is its holding for all time.
Thank you, Dave. Paul, would you like to continue there at verse 35?
Thank you, Rabbi. If your brother becomes impoverished and his means falter in your proximity, you shall strengthen him, proselyte or resident, so he can live with you. Do not take from him interest and increase, and you shall fear your God and let your brother live with you. Do not give him your money for interest, and do not give your food for increase. I am Hashem your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan, to be God unto you. If your brother becomes impoverished with you and is sold to you, you shall not work him with slave labor. Like a laborer or a resident shall he be with you. Until the Jubilee year shall he work with you. Then he shall leave you, he and his children with him. He shall return to his family, and to his ancestral heritage shall he return. For they are my servants, whom I have taken out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold in the manner of a slave. You shall not subjugate him through hard labor. You shall fear your God. Your slave or your maidservant, whom you may own, from the Gentiles who surround you, from among them you may purchase a slave or a maidservant. Also from among the children of the residents who live with you, from them you may purchase, from their family that is with you, whom they begot in your land, and they shall remain yours as an ancestral heritage. You shall hold them as a heritage for your children after you, to inherit as a possession. You shall work with him forever. But with your brethren, the children of Israel, a man with his brother, you shall not subjugate him through hard labor.
Thank you so much. And Justin, would you like to continue there at verse 47?
Thank you, Rabbi. If a resident, non-Jew, gains wealth with you, and your brother, becomes destitute with him and is sold to a resident non-Jew among you, or to an idol of the family of a non-Jew. After he is sold, he shall have redemption. One of his brothers shall redeem him, or his uncle or his cousin shall redeem him, or the closest other relative from his family shall redeem him. Or if he becomes able to afford it, he can be redeemed on his own. He shall calculate with his purchaser the number of years from the year of his being sold to him until the Jubilee year. Then the purchase price shall be divided by the number of years as the days of a hired worker. He shall be with him. If there are still many years, according to them, he shall return his redemption money out of the money for which he was purchased. But if only a few years remain until the Jubilee year, he shall make the same calculation according to his years that remain until the Jubilee, and he shall return the redemption money. He shall be with him as an employee hired year by year. He shall not enslave him with rigor in your sight. And if he is not redeemed through any of these ways, he shall go out in the Jubilee year, he and his children with him. For the children of Israel are servants to me. They are my servants whom I took out of the land of Egypt.
Thank you so much, Justin. And Rose, would you like to continue at the very start of chapter 26?
Chapter 26.
Yes.
You shall not make idols for yourselves or set up for yourselves carved images or pillars or place figured stones in your land to worship upon. For I am Hashem your God. You shall keep my Sabbath and venerate my sanctuary, mine, Hashem's. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant you rains in their season, so that the earth shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field their fruit. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage, and your vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land, and you shall lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land. Your army shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 of you shall give chase to 10,000. Your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply you. I will maintain my covenant with you. You shall eat old grain stored, and you shall have to clear out the old to make room for the new. I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I am Hashem, your God, who brought you from the land of Egypt to be their slaves no more, who broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect.
Thank you so much, Rose. Catherine, would you like to continue at verse 14 of chapter 26?
Thank you, Rabbi. But if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, if you reject my laws and spurn my rules, so that you do not observe all my commandments, and you break my covenant, I in turn will do this to you. I will wreak misery upon you, consumption and fever, which cause the eyes to pine and the body to languish. You shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you. You shall be routed by your enemies, and your foes shall dominate you. You shall you shall flee, though none pursues.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And Jay, would you like to continue there at verse 18?
Thank you, Rabbi. Verse 18. And if for all that you do not obey me, I will go on to discipline you sevenfold for your sins, and I will break your proud glory. I will make your skies like iron and your earth like copper, so that your strength shall be spent to no purpose. Your land shall not yield its produce, nor shall the trees of the land yield their fruit. And if you remain hostile toward me and refuse to obey me, I will go on smiting you sevenfold for your sins. I will loose wild beasts against you, and they shall bereave you of your children and wipe out your cattle. They shall decimate you, and your roads shall be deserted. Continue.
Yes, please.
And if these things fail to discipline you for me, and you remain hostile to me, too will remain hostile to you. I in turn will smite you sevenfold for your sins. I will bring a sword against you to wreak vengeance for the covenant. And if you withdraw into your cities, I will send pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into enemy hands. When I break your staff of bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in a single oven. They shall dole out your bread by weight, and though you eat, you shall not be satisfied.
Thank you. Robert, would you
But-
like to continue there at verse 27?
Yes, thank you. And if ye will not for all this hearken unto me, but walk contrary unto me, then I will walk contrary unto you also in fury, and even I will chastise you 7 times for your sins, and ye shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters shall ye eat. And I will destroy your high places, and cut down your images, and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. And I will make your cities waste, and bring your sanctuaries unto desolation. And I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths, as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemies' land. Even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate, it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths when ye dwelt upon it. And upon them that are left alive of you, I will send a faintness into their hearts in the lands of their enemies, and the sound of a shaken leaf shall chase them, and they shall flee as fleeing from a sword, and they shall fall when none pursueth. And they shall fall upon one another, as it were before a sword, when none pursueth, and ye shall have no power to stand before your enemies. And ye shall perish among the heathen, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up, and they that are left of you shall pine away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands, and also in the iniquities of their fathers shall they pine away with them. And if they shall confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers with their trespass, which they trespassed against me, and that also they have walked contrary unto me, and that I also have walked contrary unto them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if then their uncircumcised hearts be humbled, and they then accept of the punishment of their iniquity, then will I remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham will I remember, and I will remember the land. The land shall also be left of them, and shall enjoy her Sabbaths, while she lieth desolate without them. And they shall accept of the punishment of their iniquity, because they despised my judgments, and because their soul abhorred my statutes. And yet for all that, when they be in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, neither will I abhor them, to destroy them utterly, and to break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. But I will, for their sakes, remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. These are the statutes and judgments and laws which the Lord made between him and the children of Israel in Mount Sinai by the hand of Moses.
Thank you so much, Robert. We're now at the start of chapter 27. June, would you like to read starting at verse 1 of chapter 27?
Thank you. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when anyone explicitly vows to the Lord the equivalent for a human being, the following scale shall apply. If it is a male from 20 to 60 years of age, the equivalent is 50 shekels of silver by the sanctuary weight. If it is a female, the equivalent is 30 shekels. If the age is from 5 years to 20 years, the equivalent is 20 shekels for a male and 10 shekels for a female. If the age is from 1 month to 5 years, the equivalent for a male is 5 shekels of silver, and the equivalent for a female is 3 shekels of silver. If the age is 60 years or over, the equivalent is 15 shekels in the case of a male and 10 shekels for a female. But if one cannot afford the equivalent, he shall be presented before the priest, and the priest shall assess him. The priest shall assess him according to what the vower can afford."
Thank you, June. Richard, we're now at verse 9. Would you like to read there?
Yes, thank you. If the vow concerns any animal that may be brought as an offering to the Lord, any such that may be given to the Lord shall be holy. One may not exchange or substitute another for it, either good for bad or bad for good. If one does substitute one animal for another, the thing vowed and its substitute shall both be holy. If the vow concerns any unclean animal which may not be brought as an offering to the Lord, the animal shall be presented before the priest, and the priest shall assess it, whether high or low. Whatever the assessment set by the priest, so it shall be. And if he wishes to redeem it, he must add 1/5 to its assessment. If a man consecrates his house to the Lord, the priest shall assess it, whether high or low, as the priest assesses it, so shall it stand. And if he who has consecrated his house wishes to redeem it, he must add 1/5 to the sum at which it was assessed, and it shall be his.
Thank you, Richard. And Robin, would you like to continue at verse 16?
Yes, thank you. If anyone consecrates to Adonai any land holding, its assessment shall be in accordance with its seed requirement. 50 shekels of silver to a homer of barley seed. If the land is consecrated as of the Jubilee year, its assessment stands. But if the land is consecrated after the Jubilee, the priest shall compute the price according to the years that are left until the Jubilee year, and its assessment shall be so reduced. And if the one who consecrated the land wishes to redeem it, 1/5 must be added to the sum at which it was assessed, and it shall be passed back. But if the one who consecrated it does not redeem the land, and the land is sold to another, it shall no longer be redeemable. When it is released in the Jubilee, the land shall be holy to Adonai as land proscribed. It becomes the priest's holding.
Thank you, Robin. Let me invite Margot to continue at verse 22.
If he consecrates, thank you, if he consecrates to the Lord land that he purchased, which is not land of his holding, the priest shall compute for him the proportionate assessment up to the Jubilee year, and he shall pay the assessment as of that day, a sacred donation to the Lord. In the Jubilee year, the land shall revert to him whom it was bought, whose holding in the land. All assessments shall be by the sanctuary weight, the shekel being 20 gepas. A firstling of animals, however, which as a firstling is the Lord's, cannot be consecrated by anybody, whether ox or sheep, it is the Lord's. But if it is of the unclean animals, it may be ransomed and its assessment with 1/5 added. If it is not redeemed, it shall be sold as its assessment.
Thank you. And let me invite Dave. Would you like to continue there at verse 28?
But of all that anyone owns, be it human or beast or landholding, nothing that has been proscribed for Adonai may be sold or redeemed. Every proscribed thing is totally consecrated to Adonai. No human being who has been proscribed can be ransomed. That person shall be put to death. All tithes from the land, whether seed from the ground or fruit from the tree, are Adonai's. They are holy to Adonai. If any party wishes to redeem any tithes, 1/5 must be added to them. All tithes of the herd or flock, all that passes under the shepherd's staff, every 10th one, shall be holy to Adonai. One must not look out for good as against the bad, or make substitution for it. If one does not make substitution for it, then it and its substitute shall both be holy. It cannot be redeemed. These are the commandments that Adonai gave Moses for the Israelite people on Mount Sinai.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. You've taken us through the full book of the book of Leviticus.
That's a horrible ending, you know?
Well, we'll discuss that. We have an opportunity to give thanks for completing a book of Leviticus. There's a special prayer that we recite, and if you'd like to unmute and share it with me, together we can recite. Be strong, and we shall be strengthened. I invite you to take out a copy of the study sheet. I'd like to share with you a focused study, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation about it. And actually, I do want to say that what I'm going to share with you is really a work in progress on my part. I'm kind of been exploring some themes here that I'd like to share with you. And I'd like to enter into our Torah portion by way of the painting that's on the study sheet. It's a painting by Edouard Manet, and it's actually his final masterpiece that he did just shortly before he died. Edouard Manet was kind of a thorn in the side of proper Parisian society and of the dominant art world in Paris in the early and late 19th century, both in terms of what he painted and how he painted. And this final great masterpiece of his is quite in keeping with how he sought to provoke, if you will, the art establishment as well as the stuffy upper-class Parisians. So the painting is called the Bar of the Folie Bergère. And so what's provocative about this both is what he painted and how he painted it. The Folie Bergère was a place that was a place of great spectacle. It was a place of wild abandon. Just to get a sense of some of the things that might have been going on there, perhaps if you look at the painting in the very top left corner, you see what are two legs and kind of a turquoise shoes there at the very top left. So that's someone, that's a woman who's on a trapeze, okay? So, it was the kind of wild dancing and circus acts that were going on and that people paid. And there was a lot of alcohol. And the Folies Bergère was also a venue that was known to where prostitution was practiced. So this is the kind of the physical context of that Manet's painting. And now we're going to look at a little bit about the composition of his painting, because the main focal point here is this woman who's tending the bar. Her name was actually Suzanne. She was a model that Manet used quite often. And she is staring quite at us. She's staring quite directly at us, as if we have now stepped up to the bar and we are engaging her and perhaps ordering some kind of drink. But then our eye kind of drifts over to the right-hand side of the painting, and we notice there that her back is now reflected in the mirror that's behind her, but her reflection is in a perspective that's not in accordance with the frontal perspective that we have with the painting. So it shows her in reflection in the mirror, kind of off to the side, and there she is engaged with a man in a top hat who's not in the front of the painting. So there's something distorted about this perspective, which is the first indication that something is flawed, perhaps, about the painting, because it's not providing us a direct perspective. It's not, the perspective in the mirror is not sharing and mirroring the image that's right before us. So this is disconcerting. And then you'll notice that the shape of a triangle is replicated several times in the painting. First of all, if you'll notice that the barmaid has in the middle of her blouse a series of a corsage of flowers, and that corsage takes the shape of a triangle. And then if you drop down, you notice the way her outer garment ends there at the bottom in the shape of a triangle. And indeed, her whole bottom part of her body produces a shape of a triangle. And then you'll notice off to the side where the oranges are being held in a glass container there's a shape of a triangle there. And then off to the right of that, there's a bottle of absinthe that's also creates the shape of a triangle. So this shape of a triangle is also replicated on two bottles, one on the right and one on the left. You see there's the red triangle on the labels there. So that's the logo for Bass beer. And that was probably one of the earliest trademarks it was one of the earliest trademarks produced and here it is now being replicated in this painting. And so that's kind of promoting, giving us a sense of being aware of the consumerism, of the promotion of a particular brand of beer. And then you probably can't see it in the piece of paper, but if you have it on screen at some point, you can enlarge the painting a little bit, and you'll notice that the bottle on the left-hand side that has kind of the reddish liquid in it, perhaps it's a rosé wine. If you were to enlarge it, you would notice that Manet has inscribed his name on the label of that bottle of wine. So it's as if he is now partaking, if you will, of this kind of branding, of creating making himself be part of this consumerist, product-oriented culture that we're in this bar. You'll also notice in terms of the distortion of perspective, if you now look back in the mirror at where the bottle with the light-colored, red-colored, light-colored wine is produced, you notice that there too, that bottle in the mirror is not in the correct proportion with the bottle as it's situated on the bar. It's turned differently in the mirror. So it's another example of the ways in which he has created for us either multiple points of view, or he has intentionally distorted the reflections and distorted the perspective. So I've been playing with the notion about how Manet has both placed us in a scene that is definitely not what art, as it was accepted by the French Academy, wanted to portray. The French Academy, which was in control of the official exhibitions of French art, they wanted to portray messages of moral uplift through images that were pulled from mythology or history or the Bible, something that would give a strong moral message to people. Well, this definitely does not do that. It has taken us into a rather raucous place, a place of some ill repute. It has presented us with a woman who is not a heroic figure in the classical sense. She is a common person. And it's quite likely, many critics have said, that those who were tending bar were also presenting themselves as available for purchase, if you will, prostitution, along with all of the drinks, the absinthe, the beer, the wine, the food that's also made available there. And who knows, but the man in the top hat is engaged in some kind of transaction like that. And because she is looking at us, we are now implicated in some kind of transaction as well, whether it's the transaction the man in the top hat is engaged in or something more innocent, is up to us as the viewer to decide. So here we are, we're taken into this rather dubious scene of rather dubious moral level, as well as the composition is full of distortions and distractions and orienting us towards a scene of kind of consumerism and raucous behavior. So I'm taking that as a way to explore the extent to which these levels of less than perfect either execution of a painting or less than perfect subject matter can also provide us something that's also quite beautiful and inspiring. So with that, what I noticed is the way we have these two sections of our Torah portion. Behar is the first one, and Bechukotai being the second one. And Behar means on the mountain. And so when I say that, what I have in the image is something that's external and above us. I mean, that moment at Mount Sinai is something quite extraordinary that happened outside of the Israelites themselves. It happened way up on a mountain where God presented God's self. Then the second half starts off with Bechukotai, which means in my laws. And so I'm thinking, we've now moved from a very external event to something perhaps that's internal. So I'm interested in that transition as well. And two of the main themes that we read about, two of the main topics that we read about, Shemitah and Jubilee, Shemitah being the 7th year and Jubilee being the 50th year. after 7 times 7 years. And so what happens during Shemitah and Jubilee are various forms of what I'll call a resetting of self and the land, a reestablishing of some kind of balance, either within the land or within ourselves. And indeed, that's what's supposed to happen on Shabbat as well. Shabbat represents a resetting of the self after 6 days of labor and dealing with the external world. On Shabbat, we have more of an internal experience of what is possible. So now I'm also exploring those kind of themes as well. And we have in our Torah portion a very famous verse, which is from Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10. You shall consecrate the 50th year. You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. And for us as Americans, it's a particularly famous verse because that's the verse that's inscribed on the Liberty Bell that you can see in Philadelphia, the bell that was rung on July 8th, 1776, to summon people in Philadelphia to hear the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence. And it was rung several times in several significant moments, and not the least of which was as a way to proclaim and declare for an end to slavery in the United States. And I want to point out that the word that is here translated as liberty, deror, comes from the Hebrew dalet resh resh, which as a verb means to stream, to flow. And as a noun, it means a flowing, it means a movement. So this notion about liberty as it appears in Hebrew indicates that liberty is not a resolved state. It is something that is in motion. It has movement to it. It has a continuity of flow rather than being a settled matter. So that's a theme I'm also kind of exploring in the context of all this. So with all that, I have this notion about dealing with what I'm calling imperfections, and within the world of therapy, oftentimes therapists will deal with people who are troubled that they're not perfect, or what they're not able to achieve is perfect, or that they are troubled by constantly seeking perfection. And so there's some wisdom within that world that I want to share with you. There are number 4 and 5 here. And this is by Catherine Chen, who's a PhD, and she's explores matters of dealing with people, coaching them through life. And she's written, perfection comes from external comparison. Excellence is satisfaction of achievement that comes from within. So she's urging us to, instead of pursue perfection, pursue excellence. That is something from within rather than something that we're being judged for by some external criterion. And then Jeffrey Davis, who's a therapist, writes, pursuing excellence rather than perfection heightens our enjoyment of the process rather than attachment to the outcome. Being open to curiosity and wonder can help promote a growth mindset and combat perfectionism. As I was kind of pursuing these notions about how perfection can become a static concept that we're in pursuit of and never achieve, and therefore become anxious about that, and imagining perfection to be some kind of settled matter that can be measured, whereas excellence, if you will, is an expression of our ongoing capacity to improve. And so when I thought about that, I thought about the Japanese notion of wabi-sabi, that of finding beauty within imperfections of life and accepting peacefully the natural cycle of growth and decay. And so when you have a broken piece of pottery, rather than to be disturbed that the perfection of the original piece of pottery has now been destroyed, to appreciate that this is teaching us something, to find beauty in the imperfections. And that notion of wabi-sabi within Japanese art is complemented by the concept of kintsugi, which means golden repair. And that is the notion to take something that has been broken, specifically a piece of broken pottery, and to repair it by sealing it together with material that's made out of gold, so that once you have it, it is now, you can see that it is once a fractured piece of pottery that has now been improved, if you will, with this seal of stream of gold. It's literally a stream of gold winding through it. So I'm working together with all these different concepts. This notion of doror not being a settled matter, a resolved state of being or existence, but that of being something that is in motion, that has liquidity to it, that flows. And so I'm thinking about the liquid gold that heals this broken piece of pottery. And I'm also dealing finally with this notion of consecration, this notion of Kadesh. And that's what dominates the final verses in our portion, consecration. I'm thinking about consecration. What does that really mean? So we have this place that we have encountered earlier, and we're going to encounter it perhaps most significantly in the book of Numbers, called Kadesh Barnea, which is a site that the Israelites reached in southern land of Israel, Kadesh Barnea. And that's the place where the scouts are sent out from to scout the land and come back and report back. And that's, the scouts say it's beautiful, but we'll never be able to live there because the people that live there are too strong and numerous for us. And the people moan and groan and they give up. And so the wandering goes on for another 38 years. So Kadesh Barnea represents a junction of making a crucial decision. And so when I think about that word Kadesh, as it's associated with this place, I think consecration has to do with this moment of deciding what are we going to dedicate ourselves to, and what are we going to bring to that moment of choice. And what our Catherine Chen and Jeffrey Davis are telling us is, rather than imagine a standard of perfection that you achieve or don't achieve, think of yourself as being constantly in pursuit of improvement, of excellence. And with that, I want to conclude with a poem by Mary Oliver called The Ponds, which is on the backside of your study sheet. Every year, the lilies are so perfect, I can hardly believe their lapped light crowding the black midsummer ponds. Nobody could count all of them. The muskrats swimming among the pads and the grasses can reach out their muscular arms and touch only so many. They are that rife and wild. But what in this world is perfect? I bend closer and see how this one is clearly lopsided, and that one wears an orange blight, and this one is a glossy cheek half nibbled away, and that one is a slumped purse full of its own unstoppable decay. Still, what I want in my life is to be willing to be dazzled, to cast aside the weight of facts, and maybe even to float a little above this difficult world. I want to believe I am looking into the white fire of a great mystery. I want to believe that the imperfections are nothing, that the light is everything, that it is more than the sum of each flawed blossom rising and fading. And I do. Here, Mary Oliver begins her poem by focusing on what she describes as being perfect. And then she takes a closer look and she sees all these imperfections. And it is seeing all these imperfections that now stimulates within her a desire to be dazzled, to cast aside the weight of facts, and maybe even to float a little above this difficult world. And as she experiences that, she experiences the transcendent. And so with that, I'd love to hear what you experienced along the way of our reading and our studying this evening. Jay, thank you, please.
Well, Rabbi, thank you. Dror is a very popular male name in Israel. Is it not? Dror? Because when my daughter was in the IDF and his name was Dror, and then I've heard that name mentioned, so I see the basis of it. What is the comparison between the word you use in the study sheet for Jubilee and the word Yovel? Is there a difference in meaning?
Yovel is translated as Jubilee, yeah.
And the other one?
Shemitah, yeah,
Yeah,
the seventh year.
they're both equivalent. Shemi. And finally, I look at the picture and I'm not even convinced that it is a mirror. I'm not really convinced. And the woman who we see at an angle appears to be heavier at the waist and wearing a different type of garment, and her hair may be a different color. So I'm impressed. And the gentleman there looks awfully familiar. I might have been to him in a former life. He really looks familiar. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Jay. Let me call upon Rose, then Kath, then Richard and Paul. Go ahead, Rose.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the art and with the aesthetics in talking about this. I think you've hit on what Impressionism really was, because it went from realism, and this is like the transition that then goes to abstraction and cubism, because what you're describing is then what you see in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon by Picasso, where you see all the different angles of the bodies and the faces. And those were also prostitutes. But this character, this woman, is that transition between, an idealized thing, and then with Impressionism, what you're really getting is not this perfection, but what the eye really sees, what the light reveals. So, I think, I'm not sure what it has to do actually with Behar-Bechukotai. I am impressed with these two twin Parshiot, that the first one is really very idealistic, and it's saying, you don't own the land, you're just the steward of the land. And that's what many traditional cultures held, and Native American cultures and other traditional cultures, that there's no such thing as ownership. But then in Bechukotai, there's very specific rules about economic transactions of both people and property, of all kinds of property.
Yeah.
Does that tie into the picture, the commercialism, and basically this may have been an ad, in the picture of the Folie Bergère? Hard to say. But I think that that's really what Impressionism was, because at that time, that's when the camera came in. And so people were saying, what do I need? A painting to give a picture. And that's where Impressionism comes in.
So here's one thing that you got me to think about, Rose, which I really appreciate, which is that Behar, this moment on Mount Sinai, is something so cosmic. How can we live up to that? How can we live up to that experience that shook the mountain that shook us. And then we move from that. The trajectory is from that to this moment of Bechukotai, which is spiritual elevation is not found in avoiding the mundane transactions of life. It's found by embedding ourselves in the mundane transactions of life. So thank you very much. And I think that kind of ties together some of the themes that you are raising. I appreciate that. Let me call upon Kath and then Richard and Paul and Robert. Kath.
Thanks, Rabbi. I just wanted to mention, the concept of kintsugi is very dear to me. And I put a post in the chat. There's a singer named Peter Mayer, who's an incredible folk singer, philosopher, spiritual singer, and really good and creative. And he's in Minnesota, and I got to know him there. But one of his songs is called Japanese Bowl. And it in of itself is incredible, but somebody put to it images that are both the Japanese bowls and different elements of human, what we might call imperfection, but they're so beautiful, there's so much beauty in these. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys, because it seems to epitomize what you're talking about, Rabbi. And I was really troubled with this Parshat. I mean, it was the whole wrathful aspect of it kind of cut me to the quick. Because it's like the vengeful God, this God, which is not in my world the one that I respond to the best. I don't respond to threats very well. And it felt like it was all about threats and like unrelenting. I mean, it wasn't just like, it was like, and this and that. And even if you turn around, I'm still gonna, I really struggled with it. So maybe you can speak. I know I was being literal, but it was pretty pointed.
Thank you. Let's see what other folks have to say, and then we'll come back to it. So Richard, then Paul, then Robert.
Oh, yes, thank you, Rabbi. Well, first of all, I noticed that the word own is only one time in verse 27, 28, ownership. And it calls back to the idea of holdings are something you're responsible for. And it's about the number of plantings that can happen as you move it on to somebody else. It never belongs to you, but you're responsible for its continuing life. And one thing about your notion of fluidity, and I think you're talking about duration. And duration is an ongoing process. We're always seeking excellence in our performance, not perfection, but to do the best we can. And the last thing I want to bring up is I thought this is I agree, I think, with Kath, that this is a very, very painful portion. And I think Rabbi, you've picked out the perfect picture for what's going on in our society today, of how the promise has not been met and fails every day. And I look at her face, and there's all this wonderful fruit and wine and stuff going on, trapeze and all this wonderful stuff. And she's got the most blank, unconnecting vision. She's nothing but raw sadness. There's no light in her eyes whatsoever. What's there to feel good about? God is right. You've done a shitty job out here, you people. And when I looked at it and I thought, well, this is what, about 1888, 1882?
82, yes.
Yes, and then it came to mind, the Ballad of the Republic that was written, a poem by Ernest Lawrence Thayer in 1888. What was going on is all this wonderful stuff. I was told growing up that the greatest inventions in our life is sliced bread and night baseball. And in 1888, Ernest Lawrence coined that wonderful phrase, "There is no joy in Mudville." mighty Casey has struck out. And if we look at what goes on in our news broadcasts and how both sides just vilify one another with ad hominem arguments, it's over. It's done. And that's what I see in this picture. And now, can I float above that and understand it's a phrase and maybe eke out some Hegelian understanding of this is only a transformation. We have to be patient. We don't own anything. Hopefully, but this is a very rough piece.
Thank you. Let's cover some more. Paul, please share with us.
Yeah, now, each week, I see a beautiful, there's always a painting, there's poetry, and there's philosophers and interpretations that keep me involved. It really does a lot for me. Just want to say that, because I've got to say that because comes a but. Okay, it's always a but. Okay, in my case. Anyway, there's a tripwire when it comes to the text of the Bible. But earlier, I seem to be the bad sayer. But tonight, I noticed that Dave and Kathleen also had the same tripwire. Namely, there's the Chukim and Mishpatim. And in Mishpatim, I was always taught those are the laws where it makes sense. People argue it, and you say, you know what, you believe this and I believe that. We come up every time a different situation, maybe a different final result. But the Chukim are the laws where you got to wear blue because you're in the Air Force, or you got to wear brown. It doesn't make any sense, maybe. Just, okay, so what does God pick on? Well, if you disobey a chukim, which makes no sense, boy, that's where I got you. You're going to get all kinds of things, terrible things happening to you. So my parents always taught me about the word Rachmanis. And somewhere right between the chukim and mishpatim, that word chukim denotes just the opposite. And I heard two other people, Dave and Catherine, kind of also fall on the same tripwire that I did, because I was always looking forward to what was being discussed here. And then all of a sudden we read this other stuff. And I'm very happy that we have this sort of stuff going, because at the end of the day, that's what I remember.
Thank you, Paul. Robert.
We always need bookends, and thank you so much for a wonderful evening. This is much easier for me because I don't believe that this was meant to last 3,500 years. So obviously for me, believing that this revelation was meant for 1,500 years, it's much easier to digest. I think sometimes, and again, we all have to come to grips with the concept of God and life in ways that are authentic for ourselves. I think God speaks straight to us. He gives us the capacity for magnificent lives. But my God in heaven, the expectations are high. They really are, no matter what the religion, there's an expectation. We go to university, you don't do the work, you fail. You fail, you end up working at McDonald's, no harm in that, but you're not going to be a PhD teaching historian. Teaching history. So I don't have any issue at all with these, because I think they were intended, my understanding is they were intended to protect a people that had been brought out of slavery. And really, this was a turning point, I think, in human history. You look at the laws of the Torah, many of them continue endlessly. The idea of loving your neighbor and justice and so forth. But again, we'll all look at that differently. I think imperfection is in the eyes of the beholder. I don't believe anyone is without, quote, imperfections, and how beautiful they are. But the question for me is, are we striving to be more perfect? And I think nature has a lesson for us. I think God has given us a magnificent lesson in nature. You only get an exquisite rose when it's been grafted. You only get sweet fruit when it's been grafted. And guess what? That takes human intervention. It takes time. It takes understanding, perseverance. My understanding, our perfection is the nobility we have been given by having a human soul. But then after that, that's a given. You know, it's like a piece of, what am I thinking of? That you make something that you make, the stone you make pillars out of. You know what I'm talking about, the old Greek buildings. But then what do we do after that? And then what's our intention and how hard do we try? I think that's our perfection. If we strive earnestly, sincerely, day after day, arise and struggle. And then I think that's probably all. I've taken enough time. I love the evening, but you know, I think it's really easy to put God in our own image. He's not. I fear God in the sense of awe. And I'll tell you this from the bottom of my heart. I know if there are certain things I do, the confirmations and grace of God will be cut off to me. Doesn't mean I can't repair it, but I know that in my soul, at least for me.
Thank you, Robert. Let me call him then, Dave Leb and David Phillips, if you still want to share something, and Catherine. So Dave Leb.
Okay, I kind of have the honor of reading the end of the Parsha today, which was the end of the book of Levi, or Leviticus. And I guess you heard my comment before that this was a horrible Parsha. And what really disturbed me is when we got to the point where they talk about you may have male and female slaves, and you can buy slaves. Buying slaves means you can sell slaves. And the whole part of slavery, to me, was most disturbing in this parsha. And that's essentially what I have to say about this. You know, and I'm kind of glad we're going on in Numbers next week too. So
We have Jeremiah.
Okay. Let me call upon Dave Phillips and then Catherine. Yeah.
David and Susan have no comment.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And so Catherine, please share with them.
Okay. Notwithstanding Dave's comment, I think this painting is perfectly suited to this parshat. And one of the reasons is that we see this sort of atmosphere of some kind of celebration. But actually, if we look at the woman at the center of it, if we look where the center of the gaze is, it's actually a sobering kind of look. And there's a kind of sadness in that gaze. And so in a way, reminding us that there also needs to be some kind of fairness or some kind of justice. And I think at the heart of this parshat, there's also that there's a jubilee for celebration, but that there has to be some kind of fairness in land tenure. And although notwithstanding the references to slavery, there's also reference to some kind of, I think, social justice in terms of people being able to become free. How do they become free? And that we need to think about that.
So let me pick up on Catherine's remark here as a way to try and bring our session together, which is what you remind me, Catherine, is that her gaze is to us. So she is engaging us, the viewer. And what is her gaze? What does her gaze mean? Well, Catherine, the way you've described it is, in a sense, she is asking something of us, rather than we being a customer asking something of her. Catherine, what you're suggesting is she's asking something of us. And we have to decide what that is. But what you're suggesting, what she's asking of us is this the world you want? Is this the world I deserve to be in? Is this all that it's possible for us to create? And I want to suggest that we've read through this book of Leviticus, which is always a very troubling book because it's not full of story like the other four books of the book of Moses, 5 books of Moses. It's not full of tales and narrative, and it is just one set of rules after another. So we're happy, right? I got the sense that we're happy to be out of the book of Leviticus. Now let's go back to the story, and yet I want to suggest it's in this book. First of all, we find what's known as the Holiness Code, right in the middle of it. It is in this book where we read these verses, proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. And then as Dave Lebb points out, yeah, it says that, and then it also says you can have slaves. So what isn't that just like being cynical to say you're proclaiming liberty, but you can also have slaves? I want to suggest that what the gaze of Leviticus, if you will, the gaze of God, perhaps, that's through Leviticus, is a gaze that says, yeah, this is not a perfect world, and it's never going to be a perfect world. But you can strive to be better than you are now, and you can strive to make the world a better place than it is now. And that, I think, is ultimately what it means to be created in the image of God, not to be a perfect divine-like being. It is to be summoned to an ongoing pursuit of the elevation of oneself and the world. And so I appreciate, Catherine, what you're saying about the figure of this woman. Her name is Suzanne, who is there staring at us and saying, look at the world. Look at the world, either it's behind me or a world that's reflected in the mirror. And can we not, is this the world that we want? And so each of us has to respond to that, both in terms of our feelings about it and how we treat one another and our commitment to whether we want to accept this world or make it different. I see, Margot, you're eager to say something, please.
I think it also shows us that you need patience for perfection, no instant gratification. You don't get to eat the fruit the first year. You got to wait 6 years or 7 years for the tree to mature. And it takes patience to arrive at something like perfection, the perfect peach, but it's not perfect the first year.
Well, Margot, you have just quoted Moses Maimonides. Okay.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, because what Moses Maimonides said about this whole issue about what's the deal with slavery here in this book? Why didn't God just say no more slaves and ordained that, as a divine decree? And Moses Maimonides says, because that's not the way. If people are going to change their behavior, it takes time. It's a dynamic experience to change one's behavior. And it's not something that can be decreed. What can be decreed is this is your role as a living being. Your role as a living being is to take responsibility for yourself and the world, rather than to avoid it, to be passive in the face of it. And so I want to thank you, Margot, for ending our session by not only reminding us that it takes patience for things to come to fruition, but also to remind us that it's not just about fruit, it's not just about trees, it's all about one another. And to have patience with one another at the same time as we are challenging one another, that's a great art. And so thank you all very much for sharing art with one another. And I look forward to our next gathering. Be well, everyone. God bless you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you
you,
so
Rabbi.
very much.
Good night, everybody.